The state's leaders aren't very popular, and the state budget still isn't fixed. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state government, sometimes the federal government, and how they just might affect your life. And I think they're both affecting it these days. And here to talk to me about these things in this interesting week of state and national stuff, Charlie Wheeler is back, Director of the Public Affairs Reporting Program, University of Illinois, Springfield, longtime Chicago Sun-Times reporter at the State House before that. Charlie, welcome back.
Thank you. It's always good to be here.
And Hannah Meisel, State House reporter for Law 360. Hannah, welcome back to you.
Glad to be here.
Okay, there was a Paul Simon Public Policy Institute poll that came out from that think tank at Southern Illinois University, and 1,000 people polled basically said that the negative rating on Mike Madigan, Speaker of the House, is 61%. I guess it used to be 63, so you could say he's improving, but it's not very good. And Bruce Rauner is at 58%, but it used to be in the 30s a couple years ago. And obviously the state budget is not yet fixed. We haven't had a full state budget for something like 21 months now. There have been stopgap measures, and right now there's, other than court orders, nothing is being paid, court orders and continuing appropriations. Charlie, what do you think these numbers show about how likely or unlikely it makes a resolution to come? If the governor is has a higher negative rating, does that make it harder for him to bring people along and realize a budget resolution?
I would say not, because whatever his negative rating is, it's offset by the virtually limitless funds he has. So if I'm a state legislator and he says, vote for this bill, I'll have your back in the primary if you're challenged. I'll have your back in the general if you have a Democratic opponent. It doesn't matter whether people like him or not. That money gives him kind of a cushion that he can get away with that. It's interesting, Madigan's numbers are in the tank, and they're sort of been in the tank for a long while. It would probably be difficult for them to get any worse. And Rauner has spent millions of dollars through his surrogates and through the operations, the political operations that he funds, like the Illinois Republican Party, to trash Madigan. And Madigan, you would think, well, maybe he should be down to 90% disapproval, and he's not. On the other hand, the Democrats haven't countered against Rauner with the same kind of 24/7 negative vitriol. They're starting to get into it now with, do your job, do your job. That's kind of their meme. Despite the fact that he's gotten somewhat of a pass from the Democrats, and his approval rating now, his disapproval rating is about twice what it was a couple years ago. But in terms of it having an effect on the actual deal, to me, what's stopping anything from getting happened is the fact that there's an absolute lack of trust among the leaders. And that plays into, for example, you look at this grand bargain, the bills are written in such a way that they all have to pass and be signed or none of them count. That's kind of unheard of, because in the days when I was an active reporter, if you're the governor and I'm the leader of the opposite party and we agree on something, I don't have to write our agreement into the law. I don't have to put in these fail-safe mechanisms in the bill. I trust you. You're a man of your word. You're a woman of your word as the leader from the other party. We don't have to put this kind of fail-safe provision in case we really are lying. Yeah. And now we're at this kind of an impasse, and it's hard to see how we can move forward.
Yeah, and I would point out that when Rod Blagojevich was governor, and even members of his own party, the Democrats didn't like him. That's when they started demanding from him MOUs, memorandums of understanding, so that if he said something in a meeting, that they could actually hold him to it, because he had also lost trust with legislators through turning his back on some of the things he had said earlier.
Yeah, in the first year, he lied to people about the budget, and so they decided, okay, we can't trust this guy. And his second year, it was the Republican minority and Mike Madigan who basically drove the budget and demanded these memorandums of understanding.
Yeah, Hannah, well, this Paul Simon Public Policy Institute poll in its second day, I guess it's not horribly surprising. Found that 82% of the people thought Illinois is on the wrong track and only 12% on the right track. There's a few undecideds in there. Surprised, not surprised, and again, I guess that just says they need a solution to things.
I mean, how could that be a surprise to anyone? I'm surprised that there are people who are undecided, in fact. You know, the message out of Springfield to voters for the last, you know, since the governor got elected, but, you know, before that too, you know, when the 2014 gubernatorial election was going on, was just a message of dysfunction. And, you know, what started out as theories of dysfunction have played out into, you know, actual dysfunction that has played out into a lot of damage for a lot of people. And, yeah, I don't know how anyone could be just surprised by those numbers.
Okay. Well,
yeah, I'm surprised that there are 12% of the people thought we were on the right track.
Not everybody pays close attention to state government, Charlie.
Yeah, but even so, you'd have to be, I don't know, you'd have to been Rip Van Winkle and woken up and said, oh yeah, things are doing well.
Some people are just working hard. Now come on. Anyway, one of the things that happened in the last week is, well, we talked, and Charlie mentioned the grand bargain. So the Senate Republican and Democratic leaders had come together over recent months and said, let's not negotiate with Speaker Madigan of the Democrat running the House or Governor Rauner because they can't seem to get along. Let's just come up with this solution and these bills and put them together and pass them and then and link them. Well, that didn't happen. Then you have a crisis in Chicago public schools. Now, the governor has talked at some points, Governor Rauner has talked about, you know, we all need to, we represent the whole state and be together, but then when he's downstate, he will say, but we don't want to bail out Chicago public schools. And his view of that bailout is, well, if you know, they pay their own pension costs, but and they get a stipend because of that for some other money, but now they want another $215 million to pay pension costs for part of that operation. And the governor ended up vetoing that because he said he got emotional because he thought that the Democrats had backed out of a deal to pass statewide pension reform. Well, now a couple of Republicans, Jill Tracy, representative in the House, and Mike Connolly in the Senate, have come up with a bill for pension reform, and the governor did a video to state it, or to like put it on Facebook because he goes around the media sometimes, saying we should just pass that, then I can sign the bill and give Chicago their $215 million so they don't have to cut their school year by 3 weeks, which is now threatened. Any idea at this point if that's going to work? And take that out of the grand bargain and do it, or is that trust factor not there?
Well, it could work. Mayor Rahm Emanuel signaled that he might be open to a couple things, but then he added some of his own proposals on. But a little bit more background here is Chicago Public Schools, they factored into their budget for this current school year. They were counting on that $215 million pension payment. They thought it was in the bag. And they were surprised when the governor vetoed it this fall. And like you said, he said Thursday in a Facebook Live video that he, you know, he was emotional because he did think that the Democrats were, you know, going back on their word for statewide pension reform. But, you know, what that leaves out of the conversation is how difficult statewide pension reform is. We went through this 3-4 years ago now, and it was long and arduous, and it ended up being ultimately fruitless as the Supreme Court struck that down and struck down, you know, some Chicago pension deals that were modeled on that that model.
Right. So, Charlie, the question still remains: if they pass this pension reform, which I think includes a 401k kind of plan for new employees, and a choice again, as President Cullerton has tried in the past, employees could choose this or that, you know, the 3% annual COLA, or letting your raises build up to add on to what you get in your long-term pension defined benefit. But the question is, would that really save money, and could it get through the Supreme Court? Any thoughts on that?
Well, if it's enacted and signed into law, it will ultimately be before the Supreme Court. And the argument that Senator Cullerton has made almost from day one, which was rejected when the legislature did the bill that Hannah mentioned, is that because this is a contract, it can't be changed unilaterally, but if both parties agree, we can do it. And to get you to agree to changing will offer you something in return. And what we'll offer you is, as you said, you can keep what you have now, but any future pay raises won't become part of your base, but you'll still get that compounded 3% adjustment every year. Or you can keep your future raises, but you'll give up that compounded increase. The argument that will be made against it is that when you get hired, part of the deal is that you expect there will be pay raises. You're not going to work at the same salary for 20 years. So is that part of your package? Because what the Supreme Court said in the case that Hannah referred to is that the pension provision of the Constitution guarantees the benefits. It guarantees what other benefits you could expect at the time you were hired. And the argument will be pay raises are also covered. So you are diminishing, either choice is a diminishment, and that isn't true consideration. Now that, as I said, will ultimately be decided by the Supreme Court. To get there, of course, it has to pass, and it's been tied to the Chicago thing. And one of the arguments that is being made by the Democrats is that this is a one-year help for Chicago public schools. We would like to have a permanent provision that Chicago public schools get for their teachers' retirement system, some help from the state. And the pension changes that you're talking about, which would apply to myself, because I'm an employee of the University of Illinois, employed to public school teachers, university personnel, state employees. I take it back, not state employees at this point. But they would have an impact that would go on forever. This isn't a time-limited bill. And so the argument is that there's a disproportionality. There's a one-time thing for Chicago and an eternal thing for everybody.
Yeah, and then we come back and fight the next year.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see how that goes. One of the things that has been, I think, notable since the inauguration in January of a new set of officers or legislators, but also including, actually I guess she was inaugurated earlier because it was a special election, but Susana Mendoza came on as comptroller. She and Bruce Rauner have kind of been going after each other. One of you mentioned, the do your job. Susana Mendoza has kind of been a lead Democrat in saying to the governor, do your job, you should be proposing a balanced budget, whereas Bruce Rauner, the Republican governor, has then accused her and the Speaker of the House and the Attorney General, who is taking to court if state employees should continue to get paid only by court order or not. He's saying they want a shutdown of government. These things are manifesting themselves. Bruce Rauner wanted Leslie Munger, who he had appointed to the comptroller's job, to keep that job, but Leslie Munger lost for the second 2 years of the term. That was originally won by Judy Bartopinka, who passed away. And one of the issues, for example, is just that there's a social service agency, Drug and Alcohol Treatment Wells Center in Jacksonville, story in the State Journal Register by Dean Olson. One of our reporters said that they're anticipating closing by the end of April because of the budget impasse. They're just too far behind in state payments. So then Susana Mendoza, there was a question, the governor's office blamed the comptroller's office for not freeing up the money, and then the comptroller traveled to the Wells Center and met with them, and they were trying to work out a system where perhaps that agency could be taken over by someone that would still have credit and could get enough state money to keep open. And then the governor's people put out a statement saying, isn't it terrible that she's using state resources to drive all the way to Jacksonville and grandstand when she should just do her job and pay it. And she says, Governor, you're overseeing a government with $12 billion in unpaid bills, and so you should recognize that and fix that. I'm just wondering, I know it's a political battle. Where does this go?
It's political in the sense that you have Mendoza and Rauner at loggerheads with each other, but it is a very real, practical problem too. The comptroller's office reported after writing checks last night, they still had a backlog of $12,556,080,353.30. So roughly $12.6 billion.
Right, out of a state budget that only spends, what is it, in the range of?
Probably 32, 33.
In general fund spending each year. So you're talking like a third of the budget is
and so Rauner's
bills.
Complaining, why don't you help this center that's been in business for decades, helping countless folks with their problems. And Mendoza is trying to do it, but in that $12 billion, there's a lot of other people in similar situations. So it's kind of like triage. You're trying to, at the last minute, save people from closing down. And the irony is, at the same time, Rauner's office was complaining because Mendoza wasn't paying money into a fund that helps him with his technology upgrade.
Right.
And her response is, yeah, technology upgrade is fine, but we have human service providers that are going under. So she's in a very difficult position.
Tech upgrades don't come before starving social services, I think her statement said.
And she's in the same position that past comptrollers have been. Dawn Clark-Netsch comes to mind. Dan Hines comes to mind, and they were equally critical of the governor, even when it was someone of their own party, because they are the ones who bear the burden of trying to answer to vendors and creditors and human service agencies why they're not getting paid when they've done what the state asked them. Now, in today's day and age, the criticism is a lot more, what would you say, uncivil, if that's a word.
Social media has done this, right, Charlie?
Yeah.
Because everybody just tweets it or puts it on Facebook. Yeah.
You know, the points that Mendoza is making aren't any different than the points that were made by Netsch or by Hines. It's just that in our heightened acrimony, they come across as being more strident because that's sort of the culture of the day.
Yeah. Hannah, one thing, the Democrats in the legislature have been, particularly in the Senate, have been calling agency directors forward and saying, what would you cut? Because the governor also has a plan out there. He says, just give me the authority to cut the budget if you won't pass your own budget. And they haven't been able to really identify cuts. And so they're kind of, again, sniping at each other, but it's not a resolution.
Right. So during his budget address, the governor called for what he termed the Unbalanced Budget Response Act. And he wanted this unilateral power to cut not just discretionary spending, which, by the way, he already has that power of the pen, which is a pretty rare power for a governor to have.
The line item veto.
Right. And
but that presupposes that
there's
the
a bill.
That's
right. Yeah, they don't have anything to veto at this point.
So, you know, he wants this this power to cut the part of the budget that is non-discretionary. And then on Wednesday in a Senate committee, you know, members of the governor's office management budget were asked, so okay, which parts would you cut? And they said, well, we don't have any clear answers right now. And that's the same answer that, you know, we reporters got like 3 weeks ago, that there are no specifics now, but we'll figure it out. And so it did not pass committee, obviously. And the governor's office put out a statement, said, you know, the governor has long said he's willing to balance the budget on his own. If Democrats are unwilling to let the governor balance the budget on his own, they have no choice but to work with him.
Yeah. Well, and yet they don't have. They won't specify any cuts in advance,
yeah,
which of course brings up the trust factor.
To the whole trust thing.
Right.
And just as an academic exercise, I think the notion that you give the governor a blank check to go in and cut whatever he wants as he sees fit, I think that's a dereliction of duty on the part of the legislature. It doesn't matter who the people are.
I think Don Harmon, the senator from Oak Park, Democrat, said something like that would be like giving a razor to a toddler or something like that.
Yeah, and that has to do with the current people. But I'm just saying in terms of the separation of powers, the way the governmental structure is supposed to work, the governor doesn't have the unilateral ability to go in and tell the Secretary of State, I'm cutting $20 million from your budget, which is what this proposal would do. Yeah. I thought it was just as bad back when the Democrats allowed Rod Blagojevich, his budget director, to steal money from whatever special fund he wanted to bolster the general fund.
That was when there was still the honeymoon going on, I think.
Yeah, it was very short-lived.
Yeah, it was very short. Yeah. Just on the state thing, and I should mention that you know, everybody's looking at, and everything is colored by what's going to happen in the election of 2018 already, because people will file by the end of this year for the primaries. next March already. It's kind of crazy. Or maybe it's February. I think it's March. But J.B. Pritzker, who runs Pritzker Enterprises, comes from the Hyatt Hotels family, lives in Chicago, formed an exploratory committee for governor. We've known that he might run. There's also Chris Kennedy, who lives in the northern suburbs of Chicago, but is Robert F. Kennedy's son, is running for governor already on the Democratic side. Republican Party, of course, has attacked them both and tried to link them to Madigan, and in Pritzker's case also Blagojevich, because Blagojevich mentioned Pritzker when...
He mentioned his name once.
Yeah, and the Republicans tried to put him in the center of the Blagojevich scandal, which some people take issue with, but...
a stretch.
So I'm just saying the political season will get hotter and heavier. There's a couple other candidates for Democratic governor, including Bob Diber, who's a regional superintendent of schools from near the side of the Metro East, and Amewa Pawar, who's a alderman in Chicago. So we'll see where it goes. I don't think the Democrats have zeroed in yet on who they're going to back. It's early in the process.
Well, and for the Democrats, there's sort of a difficult choice. On the one hand, you have Pritzker, who probably could outspend Rauner.
Yeah, he's worth like $3.5 billion.
Yeah, who's kind of not in that league, but he's also obviously a millionaire. So if you nominate one of these guys, that kind of undercuts the notion that we have an out-of-touch billionaire who's screwing the state over in Rauner. So that undercuts that.
Well, we'll see.
On the other hand, if they put a Chicago alderman or a downstate school superintendent, then you can say, well, here's the man of the people, but on the other hand, where are we going to get the $50–60 million it's going to take to run the campaign?
Yeah, it's a weird one. We will see where that goes. I'm going to turn to federal issues just a bit now, but John Shimkus is a congressman from Collinsville. He's a Republican. When he first got elected in 1996, it was saying he was going to term limit himself. I think it was to 3 terms. Then George Bush and Denny Hastert, Speaker of the House at the time, or I guess leader of Republicans at least, convinced him that it was necessary to stay. So he's now the longest serving member of the Republican delegation. That puts him...
Well, he didn't want to deprive his constituents of the benefit
of his service. That's true. And he used to represent a district with Springfield, and now it's more southern Illinois after the last redistricting, after the last census. But he is basically overseeing the process of recommending to President Trump who should be judges, federal judges, and U.S. attorneys. And there's a U.S. attorney vacancy in central Illinois. 46 U.S. attorneys who were holdovers from Trump recently got let go, including Zach Farden. From Obama. Recently we got Zach Farden left the office in Chicago, so there's someone acting there. There's actually someone who's appointed by the federal court in southern Illinois district. There's 3 districts in Illinois, so these will have. So Shimkus is supposed to have a process to nominate. Senator Durbin and Duckworth, 2 Democrats who represent the whole state, say that there has been for about 20 years a bipartisan method, and they've asked Congressman Shimkus to participate, and Congressman Shimkus's response, at least as of late in the week, was, I'm still waiting for word from the Trump administration and Jeff Sessions, the new Attorney General, what they expect from us. So we're kind of up in the air on, and we're going to have major change in who's running things in Illinois. So I'm just wondering if people care about that. I don't know, but it's there.
I don't think the average person cares about it at this point, but these chief judges for the three federal districts in Illinois, they do a lot to shape, case law, and they're responsible for leadership of the other judges.
Yeah, and of course, sitting judges are lifetime appointments. So it's only when there's President Trump will only get to appoint when there is an opening. But U.S. attorneys now he's got 3 to replace in Illinois.
Right, and U.S. attorneys
the
especially,
yeah.
They're going to affect a lot of criminal law, especially, and that does affect a lot of things. For example, Zach Farden, when he resigned earlier this week, he stepped into the press office at the federal courthouse and dropped off a statement, and it said, I am unshackled now. I can do more to help with Chicago's violence. I can speak my mind. And so that just speaks to, the amount of things that a U.S. attorney would oversee. Okay. So it does affect.
Well, and there's a lot of room in the office of the U.S. attorney to pick and choose what you're going to go after. And it's not that if I don't go after political corruption, I won't have anything to do. You could say, okay, we're going to forget about political corruption. We're going to focus on violence and gangs and firearm abuse.
Right.
Or you could say we're going to focus on voter suppression, civil rights violations, that kind of thing. So you kind of get to set what your priorities are, of course, and guided by whoever is in Washington, D.C. as the AG and the president.
Right.
So there could be a real shift in what suddenly the U.S. attorneys in Illinois start to pay attention to, start to zero in on.
And we'll see how that affects government corruption and cases thereof. I should mention before we end the show, President Trump introduced his first federal budget. He zeroed out some agencies, and we've only got about a minute left, but one of the things he zeroed out was the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which helps fund places like where we're sitting right now. And of course, we all work for a very high salary, but it's fun to be here.
That we're
so,
volunteers.
I guess it depends. Do we think President Trump will be able to get a budget through like this, or do we think a Republican-dominated Congress will go along with it, or change it a lot?
Well, the budget that was proposed, it's very classical, small government, conservative thinking.
Unless except it's high on the military.
Oh yeah, that.
Yeah.
But President Trump was elected on a populist wave, where
which is what they wanted, and I'm going to have to cut it off. And I appreciate it. Charlie Wheeler, Hannah Meisel, thanks for that. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time on Capitol View.